Paradise Lost, books 3 and 4. So you guys should be starting to get a nice picture as far as how this epic poem starts coming together. I have decided that we're going to do 5 and 6 next week. So next Monday we're doing book 5 and 6. Next Wednesday 9 and 10. So we skip 7 and 8. 7 and 8 are interesting, but they're not worth spending a whole class on, I don't think. So 5 and 6 next time, 9 and 10 next week. So then I'll just trim a day of something later in the class to compensate for this. All this stuff after Paradise Lost in this class is frankly not as my aesthetic judgment is frankly just not as good as stuff we've done before. But that's just my aesthetic judgment. People specialize in 18th century English lit, and good for them, I guess. They're tougher people than me. But oftentimes this class will end on Paradise Lost. When I took this class as an undergrad, Paradise Lost was the last thing we read. And then 18th century English lit was another class. So for some reason or other, it's lumped in. It's lumped into this class. We'll read some good stuff. Jonathan Swift's a great writer we're going to read. I really love Gulliver's Travels. That'll be a fun one. So yeah, I'll look at the syllabus and cut something to compensate just so we can get more Milton time in. Okay. We spent 2 weeks on Shakespeare. It's only fair we spend 2 weeks on Milton, I think. So at least the final exam should be fairly easy, right? The range of authors we've covered haven't been too many as far as that goes. So going back to the point then, Paradise Lost. So book 3, as we see for today, is about God and Christ are in heaven, right? And they're kind of looking down on everything that's happening in book 2, especially with Satan flying through chaos and all this good stuff. Book 3 is key to this whole thing because they talk about this predestination stuff in book 3. And some of you guys Dale, I know on the discussion board really honed in on book 3 and the problems of predestination and stuff in the poem. I think it might have been Lakeisha who did too. She talked about it too, I'm pretty sure. And then book 4 is where a lot of the poems. Book 4 does a lot of work. We get Satan going into Eden for the first time. We get the introduction to Eden in the poem. Eden is almost a character in this poem. The nature of Eden, how animals work in Eden. So the term for Eden in this poem, you get 2 Edens. You get pre-lapsarian England. Pre-lapsarian means before the fall. Or not England, Eden, pre-lapsarian Eden, before the fall. And then later in the poem, after the fall, Eden changes when man fall and when man and woman fall. So today we get a good picture of what pre-lapsarian Eden's like. Then, of course, we also get today our introduction to Adam and Eve. We get a great speech from Satan to start book 4. Then pretty close to, we get Satan impersonating a cherub to actually be able to get down into Eden to look around, which is kind of a step down for him. And then, of course, to close it out today, we have this heavy metal standoff between Satan and Gabriel. To close it out for today. Right? Paradise Lost is often the subject of heavy metal music by the way. This is very much a type of heavy metal poem. Right, so where to begin? One thing that I'd like to talk about first is the other day we talked about. I mentioned the other day, I didn't go too in depth about it, but actually the literariness of this poem. We talked a lot about poetry in this class, especially like iambic pentameter and things like that. I wanted to share, for some reason or other, this isn't in our text, but Milton gave an introduction to this poem that talked about what he was hoping to accomplish. I just wanted to read it for you really quick, just because since you guys all know what he's talking about, since we covered all this stuff in class. But he says here, this is his goal. He says, the measure is English heroic verse without rhyme, as that of Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin, rhyme being no necessary adjunct or true ornament of poem or good verse, in longer works especially, but the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame meter, greatest indeed, since by the use of some famous modern poets carried away by custom, much to their own vexation, hindrance, and constraint to express many things otherwise, and for the most part worse than else they would have to express them. Not without cause, therefore, some both Italian and Spanish poets of prime note have rejected rhyme, both in longer and shorter works, as have also long since our best English tragedies as a thing of itself, to all judicious ears, trivial and of no musical delight, which consists only in apt numbers, fit quantity of syllables, in the sense variously drawn out from one verse into another, not in the jingling sound of like endings, a fault avoided by the learned ancients both in poetry and all good oratory. This neglect then of rhyme so little is to be taken for a defect, though it may seem so perhaps to vulgar readers, and it rather is to be esteemed an example set. The first in English, of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. So Milton really, maybe Milton expresses some of you guys' frustrations with rhymed poems. He thinks that rhymed poetry is poetry for a barbarous age. Right? But Milton then innovates what we call free verse in this poem. Free verse. Free verse is pretty much unrhymed iambic pentameter. So if you scan through most of these lines in this poem, some of these books of Paradise Lost have like 1,000 lines, but all these lines are in iambic pentameter, but they're unrhymed. So it's quite an accomplishment on his part, right? Just to be able to keep the meter going for that many lines, right? Very much a accomplishment. But he has, as he mentioned, in Greek and Latin verse, rhyme wasn't so important. Right? This was something that was important more in French and Italian and stuff like that. He wasn't a fan of the sonnet form. So just an interesting little aside there. Usually right before book one, but for some reason or another, a text didn't put that in there. So I just wanted to share that. Thoughts on, before we get to the themes of the poem and stuff, thoughts on the form here, the unrhymed iambic pentameter.
I appreciate his comments, but that's so far different from like Shakespeare's sonnets. I don't even know how that applies. They're two different things.
Right. Yeah, you're right. They're two different forms. Milton seems to be hating on the sonnet, right? He thinks that it kind of constrains you, it limits what you can do in a poem.
I think that for me kind of just shows Milton's distaste for authority even more, even if it's just authority in a way of writing. I think it's interesting. I think it really adds to like the whole tone of the poem really well. Although, like, it's not my favorite type of writing. It is pretty dense, but I think it comes together well.
I really like it, and I think it'd be silly if it did rhyme. I totally get that merit. I'm just saying it works well in Shakespeare's sonnets. I couldn't imagine them without it.
Right. An epic poem that rhymed would be pretty weird, I think, right? We read
Also,
Bailey.
like the,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I really appreciated that in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, those repeating constants.
Yeah.
What kind of style was that again?
That was alliterative poetry, right? So that was during the alliterative revival. They did that because just like with epic poems back in Homer's and ancient Greeks and Romans, they did that for the same reason. The alliterative poetry was easier to recite for like a public performance. So the epic is a genre that's meant to be read and performed. So Paradise Lost is meant to be read aloud, even, right? As a sort of means of performance. Sometimes like New York and places, they'll actually have readings of it where they'll read it aloud, right? And kind of perform it, which is pretty cool. I would actually like to see that sometime.
I found that my own part, like throughout this read through, I've enjoyed reading it aloud just to myself and my fiance. I find it like interesting. He gets into it too. He's not big on the classics, but he actually really does like this one.
Right.
I went down the rabbit hole about classic literature, and they was discussing how the Bible should be a classic. It's classic literature that should be taught in a classroom. But you just go down a rabbit hole, that just wouldn't go down well.
Yeah, that's something that I wouldn't be comfortable doing as a teacher. Yeah, they actually do have college classes on the Bible and literature Bible as literature at some schools. So that is a course that you can take at a university. I know a lot about it, but I still wouldn't want to teach it just because that's a pretty delicate subject, right? Even something like Paradise Lost is a delicate subject. Just think about all the stuff that's in here that's not in the Bible. That's actually something that we're going to be discussing over the next couple of classes, right? How much about Christianity that we know today comes from Paradise Lost and not the actual Bible, right? That's going to be a question that we need to answer over the next couple of days.
One question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. One question I had was this book ever did any countries ever attempt to ban this book, or really just not have it studied in any kind of education system? Because this feels like one of those books that a lot of people, especially in very Christian countries, would want to ban.
No, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I know in England it's always been very highly esteemed. In America too, but that's within the Anglo tradition. I don't know how it's been received, and I kind of doubt France or Italy would censor this, just because they're very sort of loose countries. Spain might, because Spain is very hardcore Catholic, but I might just be judging. I'm just speculating here. Russia, that's so I think in the Western world, at least, it's pretty safe. I don't know how much it's read in like Russia or Asia or something like that. That's an interesting question in and of itself. Western world, I'd say you're probably good for the most part. This is one of those texts that's so revered. I mean, it's been talked about since it came out, right? This is seen as one when we ever talk about high literature, high art, right, this text has been seen as that even since it first came out. This is one of those books that's in the canon, right? It's never going to leave the canon, right? People will be talking about this book 500 years from now, probably, in a class like this. Just like Shakespeare, right? The timeless sort of lit that we have. So as long as we have the Christian religion, right, this thing will be relevant, right? So getting back to the point at hand, I just wanted to bring that free verse thing up just because I figured you guys would appreciate it. You know, like even as far as we've studied all these forms, I thought his thoughts on that would be interesting to you. But there's lots of ways we can go with our conversation for today. We do need to talk about, so let's look at the very beginning of book 3. Very beginning of book 3. I wanted to read this passage to you as kind of a key passage in the text. Very beginning of book 3. Well, I guess today the way we'll handle it, let's talk instead of doing topical, let's handle each book. We'll do book 3 first, kind of parse through the stuff that's going on. Then in book 4, we'll do the same. I guess that's probably a good way to steer the conversation today. But very beginning of book 3 on page 1773, this is a very influential passage. The other day we talked about how Milton was a blind poet. Right? He was blind. He wasn't blind his whole life. He went blind later in his later years. When he conceived this poem, the way this poem was actually written down, he actually dictated it, right? It just came out of his head, right? He actually dictated it to someone who wrote it down for him, which is just kind of crazy to think about. But this passage at the very beginning of book 3, this is a case where the author interjects himself into the story. We talked about the epic poem. Oftentimes in the epic poem, the author has to call on the muse, right? The author has to call on the muse to even be able to discuss such high, lofty subjects as gods fighting one another, right? In Greek mythology, or the war in heaven and Christianity here. So I just want to go over this passage. So he says, "Hail, holy light, offspring of heaven's firstborn, or of the eternal co-eternal being, may I express thee unblamed. Since God is light, and never but in unapproached light dwelt from eternity, dwelt then in thee, bright effluence of bright essence increate. Or hearest thou rather pure ethereal stream, whose fountain who shall tell? Before the sun, before the heavens thou wert, and at the voice of God as with a mantle didst invest the rising world of waters dark and deep, one from the void and formless infinite. Thee I revisit now with bolder wing, escapest the Stygian pole, though long detained in that obscure sojourn, while in my flight through utter and through middle darkness borne, with other notes than to the Orphean lyre, I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent and up to reascend. Though hard and rare, thee I revisit safe and fill thy sovereign vital lamp. But thou revisitest not these eyes that roll in vain to find thy piercing ray and find no dawn. So thick a drop serene hath quenched their orbs, or dim suffusion veiled. Yet not the more cease I to wonder where the muses haunt clear spring, or shady grove, or sunny hill. Smit with the love of sacred song that chief thee, Sion, and the flowery brooks beneath that wash thy hallowed feet in warbling flow. Nightly I visit, nor sometimes forget those other two equaled with me in fate. So were I equal with them in renowned, blind Timaeus and blind Menenides. I might have pronounced that wrong. and Tiresias and Phineas, prophets old, that feed on thoughts, that voluntary move harmonious numbers, as the wakeful bird sings darkling, and in shadiest covert hid tunes her nocturnal note. Thus with the year's seasons return, but not to me returns day, or the sweet approach of evening or morn, or sight of vernal bloom, or summer's rose, or flocks, or herds, or human face divine. A cloud is instead, and ever during dark surrounds me from the cheerful ways of men, cut off, and for the book of knowledge fair, presented with a universal blame of nature's works to me expunged and raised, and wisdom at one entrance quite shut out. So much the rather, thou celestial light, shine inward, and the mind through all her powers irradiate. There plant eyes, all mists from thence purge and disperse, that I may see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. So I've always found that passage very moving. Right? He talks about how, right? It's both very moving and very arrogant at the same time, right? Because he's even comparing himself to blind prophets in the old Greek stories, like Tiresias. Tiresias is the one who predicted, who told Oedipus that like he was at fault for the kingdom falling apart around him. Right, so he's comparing himself to all these blind poets of old, or sight, or fortune tellers, or whatever. But he's saying here, like, it took me, a blind person, to even imagine hell. Right, the muse helped me imagine hell, but it didn't hurt, right, that I was blind, so I could actually go into that eternal darkness. And he can no longer see light. So to actually be able to discuss heaven, he has to kind of call on God here, right? Plant eyes in me, right? So that I can actually see, be able to even tell this. So I don't know. Do you guys find this passage as moving as me? I've always found it really, really moving, even to even be able. It's a nice way to introduce heaven, Milton's heaven, right? Since we spent the last two books in hell, right? It's a nice way to sort of introduce heaven, I think. What do you guys think?
I guess after
Initially, I really didn't think that far into it, but after you reading through it and kind of explaining a little bit of the importance to it, I definitely see the links to the hell that Milton created, because he talks about being removed from the light and being removed from God's presence. And I guess to him, hell was being removed from sight, because a lot of people see nature and see the beauty around us as God and as spirit and as holiness, I guess you could say. And it really makes a lot of sense. And I really like the way it's written.
Other thoughts here?
I've got guys doing work outside my house, and it's real loud. That's why I can't really talk right now. I like, let's see, lines 54 and 55 the best. It's pretty arrogant, but I think it's really cool.
We're talking about where he says plant irradiate, there plant eyes, all mist from hence purge and disperse. Is that the line you're talking about?
Yes. He's basically saying, I'll tell you things that are invisible to you guys. You guys can't see it, but I can.
With the help of God, right? He even says here that he has the help of God to even be able to imagine this. Imagine the heavenly sphere, right?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what other people thought about that. You could almost say that's kind of blasphemous. Like, how like the authors of the Bible, they had this insight, spiritual insight straight from, up on high. I'm sure they find that kind of blasphemous that this man was able to do this, or the gall to even write this.
I agree with you, Dell, and I think it almost sounds commanding in a way. Like he's not usually when when you're reading through the Bible, things are asked him, things are pleaded to God. They're not really like, do this now because like irradiate, they're plant eyes that I might see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. And it's like, I don't know, it's just very arrogant, definitely very arrogant, almost commanding, I guess I could say is how I'm taking it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel that way. I could see how this could be taken quite badly.
But what's everybody else think about this? Anybody find this kind of blasphemous, or do you find it moving?
I think I kind of agree with Nicole. Yeah, I kind of see where you're going with that, but I also see Dell's perspective too. But like when Nicole started talking about like the Bible and like how people asked instead of commanded, I definitely agree with that.
Right?
Yeah, like with this we get all of the want but not any of the give, because there's always some kind of give. It's like an if then. If I do this, then I get this, and there's no if in this, it's just then.
Right? Even if you think about it, we never really get an inside look into heaven much, even in the scripture, right? We get descriptions, but we don't get God having conversations with people up in heaven much. Right? I can think of a few examples, like in Job, where he talks with the devil. Right? But yeah, he's adding to the Christian lore here, right? Which is interesting. But
I'm just wondering if that lore was accepted.
That's something I'm wondering too, Dell. I was actually about to ask that.
he was a stout Puritan, right? He was a stout Puritan. The Puritans were very hardcore Protestants, right? So, for the most part, I think so. I don't think this received a lot of backlash. I would be interested. I would actually be interested to talk about this with like a minister or something, right? Today, just to see what their insights would be. I've
I
only
just have,
talked. I've only talked about this with other sort of English people, but I would actually really love that. But even like if we think about it, like C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer who wrote the Chronicle of Narnia, right? You guys know that. He loved this, right? He thought that this was good stuff. Did I interrupt you there, Dale?
I was just, I know some pretty devout people. I don't even think they would entertain discussing this. I know that's sad, but like Lois, he's a lot more open-minded and cultured and traveled.
Well, as we'll keep talking about, even like how much we can see, how much of how we can see the devil and stuff. How much is that due to this book? I think that's a conversation that that's worth having.
This is a hot take, but I think this. I'm loving this, by the way. I mean, absolutely love it. I like this by far out of everything I've read, maybe besides Chaucer. But to me, this condemns God just even farther for me. Like, it doesn't just, it just, it's not good in my opinion. And I can discuss that later.
Well, that's what you wrote your response on. Let's move to that part of book 3. Right in book 3 here, they're discussing all of creation. Right, what's going to happen with creation? So remember here that God exists outside the realm of space time. Right, God is not bound by the laws of space and time. Right, so God almost exists in his own dimension, right? Where he can kind of see everything that's ever going to happen, right? All possibilities. Think about God like God sees where there really is a multiverse, right? God sees it all. He's all knowing. So this book 3 deals with the Calvinism problem in the poem, right? The Calvinism problem. We have to kind of deal with the Calvinism problem because depending how much you subscribe to Calvinism, right, even sets up the trap of should we feel sympathy for the devil or not, right? Or even sympathy for Adam and Eve. And even like how much does God set up Adam and Eve, right? So God explains his point of view here. This is the answer to the Calvinism here. If we look on page 1776, great page number for a passage like this, right? 1776. This is where God kind of explains the problem of predestination with Satan and Adam and Eve. He knows they're even discussing here, like, yeah, we see Satan, he's going to Eden. Yeah, we know mankind's going to fall, right? It's all preordained. But starting on line 110, it says, they therefore as the right belonged, so were created, nor can justly accuse their maker or their making or their fate, as if predestination overruled their will, disposed by absolute decree or high foreknowledge. They themselves decreed their own revolt, not I. If I foreknew, foreknowledge had no influence on their fault, which had no less proved certain unforeknown. So without least impulse or shadow of fate, or aught by me immutably foreseen, they trespass, authors to themselves in all, both what they judge and what they choose, for so I formed them free. And free they must remain till they enthrall themselves. I else must change their nature and revoke the high decree unchangeable, eternal, which ordained their freedom. They themselves ordained their fall. The first sort by their own suggestion fell, self-tempered, self-depraved. Man falls deceived by the other first. Man therefore shall find grace, the other none. In mercy and justice both through heaven and earth, so shall my glory excel, but mercy first and last shall brightest shine. So in those few lines, we get a lot of theology here, right? So we get the answer here on why the fallen angels can't be forgiven, right? He says it was their own nature that caused them to. They didn't even have to be tempted, right? They did it themselves by their own self-tempting. Mankind gets tricked, right? So that's why mankind gets a second chance, whereas the fallen angels don't. Well, depend. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. Is that nonsense, right? Why can't the fallen angels ask for forgiveness? But he said, God does say here too, right? Mankind is free, right? He gives us freedom. Just because he's all knowing, just because he can see, think about it like infinite probabilities. This is the way that I like to describe Calvinism. Think about it like it's infinite probabilities. God can see the infinite number of probabilities. He can kind of see how the numbers are going to crunch, what we're all going to pick for every choice we make in our lifetimes. So just because God can see that, just because he's on a different plane of existence than us, right, that doesn't mean we still don't have freedom, right? So he says he created us free to fall here, free to fall. He knows we're going to because he's all knowing, but that doesn't mean we don't have freedom. So there's that here too. That's the answer to Calvinism. That's Milton's answer to Calvinism, right there. We do have freedom, even though it is preordained. Right? So what do you guys think of all this?
A question that I had reading that about the angels, he pretty much says that their nature is what caused them to fall, but didn't he create their nature? Like
Yes.
that's the question that I had. I feel like they were set up to fall, completely set up to fall. And even though, they had to choose those actions, their nature was set up in a way that would make them most likely, more probable to choose those actions. And I guess fulfill that part of the plan, which is diabolical, honestly.
Right. Yeah, they supposedly had the angels supposedly have their own free will too.
Yeah,
And
Satan brings this up in book 4, not to skip ahead, but I'm pretty sure he's of the mindset, or Milton, puts it in there that he is that if all the other angels, especially the archangels, had the same power and free will that he did, why didn't they necessarily choose like he did? But and then, like in my discussion, I mean, you can take it as him being in denial for his part in the fall, but you could also look at it as this was all preordained. His defect. What makes it he's special because his defect was implanted. He needed to fall for God's sadistic plan to come to fruition. That's basically it.
I agree with you there, Dale. And another question this brings up for me, which is a big one, if the idea of a loving God is true in this instance, theoretically, how could a loving God set up his creations, which he is supposed to love, to fall into hell and suffer for eternity and not even have the opportunity to repent and gain some kind of peace? Like, that does not make sense. And why would the overall plan, be for humans to have to endure so much suffering if he loved them so much? Like, that's just the biggest question for me.
Right. Well, he doesn't want to create us as robots, right? He could create us as robots or just programmed to sing his praises, right? But that that wouldn't fly, right? That in that case we wouldn't have free will.
And just another thing to add, I think it's really, really hypocritical that God is allowed to be a jealous and an envious God, but Satan, the angels, and humans aren't supposed to be envious or jealous of anything. We're just supposed to be at peace with our station, even though we may or may not have had a big role in choosing it or in picking it out, But God is allowed to be jealous of if we worship others or if we are too high for ourselves or anything like that. It's just pompous.
How dare you, Nicole? That's blasphemy.
Come on, Dale. We're all going to hell anyways.
Not if I think it's a fictitious place.
Good point.
It would be a good romantic poet over there, Nicole. You're echoing Percy Shelley over there.
Yeah, I always thought that strange that I know there's several verses where he admits to being a jealous God, but that's just part of his persona.
You guys, Nicole and Dale, are pretty critical of this idea, then, right, of Calvinism and setting mankind up to fail and all this. Some of you in here weren't, disagree. I know, Kelsey, not to pick on you, but you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say my little snippet. I think that if we were created I think God has a really good reason to be a jealous God. Like, he literally created us and sent Jesus. So why should we think that we have any right to worship other gods or put anything else above him? Like, he literally spoke everything into existence and all that. So why isn't he allowed to be jealous? That's my answer to that question, and you can agree or disagree. That's all up to you. But I think that the reason Adam and Eve had the right to be forgiven is because like their heart was in it. And I think as far as Satan goes, like he kind of chose the other route. Like he decided, I want to reign in hell. I would rather not be a servant to God. Like I want to do my own thing. And he even says, I can't remember exactly where it's at, but like he wouldn't even really be forgiven because it wouldn't be his heart. Like that's not where he would be. So he would constantly be like so deep in his own want to be on top, then does that make sense? Am I
Yep.
like going in the right direction?
It makes
So
sense.
I think that's why he doesn't really have the ability to be forgiven.
I like that passage you're talking about, though. He talks about even if God did give him a second chance, he'd be miserable, and it would just set him up for an even harder relapse, is what it says.
Yeah, and
you're-
I totally understand where you're coming from, Kelsey. And the question like that I have, not like directly for you, but for everybody is, if we do have free will, who's to say Satan doesn't truly decide that he is happy with his station and that he really does change and he really does choose to be good? Like if we have free will, he absolutely could do that.
Right. But he chooses not to, as we see in book 4, which was what Kelsey was alluding to.
There's no way that we spin this, no matter how far you go around. And I would never set out to disrespect anybody. I fully believe Kelsey believes in God, and I totally respect that. I would never try to debate anything against that. God is culpable in this story, no matter how you spin it. You can say what you want to. Did Satan really choose? I don't think he did.
I agree with you there, Dale.
Let's get to this. We got to talk about this passage too. It's a long one, but to make sense of all this, we kind of got to go over it. This is on 1792. 1792. This is where this is besides like the passage in book 1 about better to reign in hell and serve in heaven. Like this is the famous Satan passage from this poem. Might as well read the whole thing here, just rather than picking and choosing. So starting on line 32, I'll read it for. Unless somebody else wants to take a stab at reading it. Anybody want to take a stab at reading it?
What was the passage again?
Line 32 on page 1792, and that'll go all the way up to like line. That'll all go all the way up to the beginning of page 1794. So
Okay, it starts at line. Say the line one more time, please.
32. Oh, thou that with surpassing glory. That's where you start.
I'll take a shot at it.
All right.
O thou that with surpassing glory crowned, looks from thy sole dominion like the God of this new world, at whose sight all the stars hide from diminished heads. To thee I call, but with no friendly voice, and add thy name, O sun, to tell thee how I hate thy beams, that bring to my remembrance from what state I fell, how glorious once above thy sphere. Tell pride and worse, ambition threw me down, warring in heaven against heaven's matchless king. Ah, wherefore he deserved no such return from me, whom he created what I was in that bright eminence. And with his good upbraided none, nor was his service hard. What could be less than to afford him praise, the easiest recompense, and pay him thanks? How do? Yet all his good proved ill in me, and wrought about malice. Lifted up so high, I stained subjection, and thought one step higher would set me highest, and in a moment quit the debt immense of endless gratitude, so burdensome, still paying, still to owe, forgetful what from him I still received, and understood not that a grateful mind by owing owes not, but still pays at once, indebted and discharged. What burden then Oh, had this powerful destiny ordained me some inferior angel, I had stood then happy. No unbounded hope had raised ambition. Yet why not? Some other power as great might have appraised, and me though mean drawn to his part. But other powers as great fell not, but stand unshaken. From within or from without, to all his temptations armed, hadst thou the same free will and power to stand. Thou hadst, whom hadst thou then, or what to accuse, but heaven free, love dealt equally to all. Be then his love accursed, since love or hate to me alike it deals eternal woe. Nay, cursed be thou, since against his thy will choose freely what it now so justly rues. Me miserable, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair. Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell, and in the lowest deep a lower deep still threatening to devour me opens wide. To which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. Oh, then at least relent. Is there no place left for repentance, none for pardon left? None left but by submission, and that word disdain forbids me. And my dread of shame among the spirits beneath, whom I seduced with other promises and other bonds. Then to submit, boasting, I could subdue the omnipotent, I me. They little know how dearly I abide that boast so vain, under what torments inwardly I groan, while they adore me on the throne of hell, with diadem and sceptre high advanced. The lower still I fall, only supreme in misery, such as joy ambitious finds. But say I could repent and could obtain, by act of grace, my former state. How soon would I recall high thoughts? How soon unsay what foreign submission swore? Ease would recant vows made in pain, as violent and void, for never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. Which would be led me to a worse relapse and heavier fall. So should I purchase dear, short intermission bought with double smart. This knows my punisher. Therefore, as far from granting he, as I from begging peace, all hope excluded thus, behold instead of us outcast. Exiled his new delight, mankind created, and for him this world. So farewell hope, and with hope farewell fear. Farewell remorse, all good to me is lost. Evil be thou my good. By thee at least divided emperor with heaven's king I hold. By thee and more than half perhaps will reign, as men ere long and this new world shall know.
Very good. Then the line after that, we start to see his light starting to fade. Right? It says, "Thus while he spoke, each passion dimmed his face, thrice changed with pale ire, envy, and despair, which mastered his borrowed visage and betrayed him counterfeit. Any eye beheld, for heavenly minds mate from such distempers foul ever clear." So we start to see, this is where we really start to see his Titan-like status start to diminish. But lots of stuff going on there. One of you guys want to unpack it? Kelsey kind of already did, right? Talking about his ideas here, right? Why he can't be forgiven. But anybody want to chime in?
I think within this story, I do understand that he might not be true if he truly did, like, if he did repent, it might not be true, it might be false. But part of me still just really can't come to understanding with, him not being able to repent. Like, that's something, even honestly, even when I was an avid churchgoer, that's something that I asked my pastor. I was like, what if Satan really, really repented? And they were like, that will never happen. He's evil. And I was like, but he's one of God's creations. Before he was the devil, he was Lucifer. He was an angel. And it's so difficult. And a question that I have, it's like in the ballpark, but not exactly on topic. If we are created in God's image, why are we fallible? Why do we make mistakes if we are made in his image? Does he not make mistakes then, even though he is perfect? I suppose the fall could be to blame for that, but still, if Adam and Eve were made in his image, then how did they fail and fall? is it not possible for him to fall?
Right. Those are very good questions. No, I
Questions
don't,
that can't be answered.
yeah. Those are very good questions. Period. 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 Ellipsis. Right. What do you say to that? Right.
It's not for us to know.
Hey, I like how on the next page over, Milton calls him an art felon. I only seen that once. I laughed when I seen that.
What do you guys think of his argument here? He even comes out and says, "Hey, you know what? Serving in heaven wasn't too hard. Right? It was, it was kind of annoying, right? Always having to kiss God's butt, right? But it wasn't too hard to do, right? Life was easy, right? But he created me so darn cool, right? I'm the angel of light here, right? If he would have created me as a cherub or something, maybe I wouldn't have rebelled against God, right? But he didn't. So he created me as this really cool angel of light. So it was within my nature to fall. He kind of argues here, right?
Yeah, to me, I feel like it can be taken two ways, and I don't know which way to like take it, or if I'm supposed to like really stick with one way. I see it as one, him really coming out and saying, I was designed to fail. It's not my fault. But then also you can look at it as him trying to kind of not take accountability, using that as an excuse to not take accountability. And I don't like I'm leaning both ways, but I don't really want to commit to one just yet.
I've heard an argument, a philosophical argument that when you're dealing with eternity, I mean, our minds can never grasp it, but if you have free will in eternity, you will eventually. I think even Einstein had a theory like this. There's the possibility would eventually occur that this would happen, and if not with Satan, it would happen with one of the others. You know what I mean? I know that's kind of out there, but it's interesting.
No,
No,
Satan,
I think it's true, Dale. I definitely do.
Satan even says that in there, right? If it wasn't me, it could have been another one, right?
Hey, Gabriel absolutely destroys him at the end of book 4. I love that.
Yeah.
Not even lifting a hand.
He shows them up, right? He runs away like a little coward, right? Which, considering he's supposedly on par with Gabriel and Michael, right? But he fears both of them, Gabriel and Michael.
Yeah, Satan's talking trash to him, and Gabriel is like, I know exactly who you are and what you're capable of, and I know full well you know what I'm capable of. He's like, but our powers, the only reason we have them is because of him. And if you look up into the sky right now, you'll see your lot up in the celestial signs. Satan's just like, oof, and he just takes off.
It's almost like a WWE match promo at the end.
Yeah, talking straight trash.
Well, the last point I want to get to, well, whenever we talk about Satan here, right? He also, I have to mention his turning into a cherub to even get into Eden. Right? Then he kind of sneaks and slinks through. The reason why he gives this passage is he gets jealous because he sees Adam and Eve and their love, all this stuff, and that gets him jealous. But we need to talk about Adam and Eve at least a little bit today. We're going to get lots more of them. We'll have lots more time to talk about them when we talk about book 5 and 6 next week too, in case we don't fully cover everything today. But book 4 is interesting because it gives Eve's creation story. I want to go over the Eve's creation story part. Okay. And that is on page 1801. Adam will talk about his creation story, I think in book 5 or 6. Here we get Eve's. So look at starting on line 440. This is when she starts to give it. She says, "To whom thus Eve replied, O thou for whom and from whom I was formed flesh of thy flesh, without whom am to no end, my guide and head. What thou hast said is just and right. For we to him indeed all praises owe, and daily thanks. I chiefly who enjoy so far the happier lot, enjoying thee preeminent, by so much odds, while thou, like consort to thyself, canst nowhere find. That day I oft remember, when from sleep I first awaked, and found myself reposed under a shade on flowers, much wondering where and what I was, whence thither brought, and how. Not distant, far from thence, a murmuring sound of waters issued from the cave and spread into a liquid plain. Then stood unmoved, pure as the expanse of heaven. I thither went with unexperienced thought, and laid me down on the green bank to look into the clear, smooth lake, that to me seemed another sky. As I bent down to look, just opposite, a shape within the watery gleam appeared, bending to look on me. I started back, it started back, but pleased I soon returned. Pleased it returned as soon with answering looks of sympathy and love. There I had fixed mine eye until now, and pined with vain desire. Had not a voice thus warned me, what thou seest, fair creature, is thyself. With thee it came and goes, but follow me, and I will bring thee where no shadow stays thy coming, in thy soft embraces, he whose image thou art. Him thou shalt enjoy inseparably thine, to him shalt bear multitudes like thyself, and thence be called mother of human race. What could I do but follow straight, invisibly thus led, till I espied thee, fair indeed and tall under a platon, yet methought less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild, than that smooth watery image. Back I turned, thou following cried out, Return, fair Eve, whom fliest thou? Whom thou fliest, of him thou art, his flesh, his bone. To give thee being, I lent out of my side to thee, nearest my heart, substantial life. To have thee by my side henceforth, an individual solace dear. Pardon my soul, I seek thee, and thee claim my other half. With that thy gentle hand seizest mine, I yielded. From that time see how beauty is excelled by manly grace and wisdom, which alone is truly fair. So Eve looks into the pool of water. She falls in love with her own reflection, right? Like Narcissus in Greek mythology, right? And it takes God steering her over to Adam to get her to even go with Adam. But even then, she's like, yeah, Adam's not as good. I don't feel as much desire for Adam as I felt for my own image. So what's this passage do to you within this broader discussion of like, do our inner qualities lead us to fall? It is Eve's vain here, right? She's very vain. So
It's interesting that she had this this epiphany, or whatever you want to call it, this thought, even before they had taken the fruit from the tree.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Dale. Like, it's so strange. And honestly, I don't know if this is really off base or anything, but I almost got some like homosexual vibes from the pool. Like, you know, before she had any other outside influence, before she was told what she should do or what's right, her immediate thought was, wow, that's a sexy woman in that pool right there.
Yep.
You know, that was her first thought. And then she looked at Adam and she was like, yet be thought less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild. And like, it almost made me think of conversion therapy. I'm not gonna lie. When God was like, there, that's where you're supposed to be. Like, that's really what it set my mind to. And if that is her initial nature and that is sinful, why was she created like that? if she's just going to be put down for it if she can't even help it.
Right.
Hey,
Yeah.
on page 1803, Satan makes the argument that the only reason that they're faithful to God is because they're ignorant, because they haven't partaken in that the fruit yet. But you know, it's just weird that this happened before they even sinned, if you will.
I found it strange that there were allusions to like sex whenever it talked about them, going to the marriage bed and whatnot before eating of the fruit. Because I had always thought that, when they ate the fruit, that's when they realized like carnal desire, when they really discovered sex. And I always thought that eating the fruit was necessary to doing what God commanded them to, like to procreate and repopulate. The fruit was necessary to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's quite right. He planned on them procreating before that he ate the fruit. They only became aware of their insecurities and, wanted to put on clothes and this, that, and the other. No, that he fully intended on them to procreate before the fruit.
So I'm glad you brought this up, Nicole. Whenever I've taught this before, the way that I always explain it is, so we have pre-lapsarian Eden again and post-lapsarian Eden. In the poem, they have sex in both forms of Eden. But I always like to joke and say that pre-lapsarian Eden is like the missionary position, right? It's nice and loving and tender, right? Post-lapsarian position Eden, it's rough, right? That's when the rough stuff starts.
So that's when BDSM got brought into things, huh?
That's all I always like to joke.
That was great. I'm going to remember that forever.
Milton tells us that even once we get to book 9, I think he talks about like how wild the sex is right after they eat the apple, right? Nothing quite like it was before.
And you know what you said earlier, Dale, about Satan saying that they're only faithful because they had eaten the fruit. Honestly, I think that's supported in this text because, as soon as they do eat the fruit, they become unfaithful. As soon as they have knowledge, that's what happens.
No, I was referring to this text. Satan literally says is it by their ignorance that they're faithful? Is it because they have no knowledge, they don't know any better, but to be faithful and in servitude?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like the text supports.
Hey, earlier before that though, he even look at 1803 or wait, no, 1800 line 386. I love how he says, he basically tells man, I think he's talking to himself, but he says, if anybody's responsible, thank him who puts me loath to this revenge on you who wrong me not for him who wronged. And should I at your harmless innocence melt as I do, yet public reason just. Yeah, I mean, he's, kind of saying everything I'm about to do to man, blame him for it. And then towards the end of this, he even says, if God didn't want me here to do all this, he should have assured the bars better on his iron gates. I'm here because he allowed it.
Right.
I found that very, very, very interesting, to say the least.
It's almost like every single bad thing that we see happening in this text is allowed. It's foreseen. It is allowed. It's not stopped. It's almost intended by God. Like you said earlier, Dylan, I couldn't agree more. There's no way to paint God in a good picture in this text, no matter how you look at it. He is a fiend pretty much, in this text at least.
I mean, you could, but I would argue against it for sure.
But the question is though, has the devil roped you in with his tricks?
Hey, he seduced me.
Has he seduced you in this poem? Right.
I have been seduced. I'm not to blame.
I don't feel sympathy for the devil. I feel sympathy for all of the Creator's creations. So I guess that would be him too. Yeah.
Kelsey, to get back to you, I'm curious to know what you think about that Eve passage I just read. What did you make of that?
At first, I was with Nicole. I was like, it's kind of different, but yeah, that was kind of weird. I don't know. I'd never thought of it like that before. Like when I read it, I didn't think of that, and then when you read it out loud, I was like, oh yeah, that does sound weird.
Yeah, and a lot of apocryphal Christian texts. They cover the Genesis story, and actually Eve is oftentimes called the second woman that God created. Right, the first one was named Lilith, and she sinned, right, and then God kind of like wiped her from existence, and then created Eve. Um,
Yeah, in a lot of texts, she's basically the devil's boo. If
right.
I think that like that kind of context and that like rhetoric is really, really what began, I think, or was I don't know how to explain it. It was either written like that by humans without the influence of God, or it was like that and it influenced humans into feeling that women were expendable. I feel like.
Right. You're right to point out discourses of misogyny here, Nicole. That it's definitely here in this poem. Like once we get to book 9, the fall happens. Who's Adam point the finger at? He doesn't point it at himself, right? He points it straight at Eve, right? Just like how a lot of people blame women today, right? Eve ate the apple, right? It's your fault. Right?
yeah, there's even misogyny stuff that we've already seen because she basically says she was created for Adam. You know, that she has no other purpose in that. I mean, that's very archaic, but it was, that's still prevalent.
Yeah, that's something that I was going to point out too, Dale. Like, her only purpose is to be there for Adam and do whatever he needs and then make babies. And that's like, it's bullshit. I can't even lie. It's straight bullshit. And really, and I know this isn't like just the text, this is also in the Bible, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I personally have an issue with Eve coming second. I do not think that women are better than men, and I do not think that we have a higher value than men. I think that both of us men and women are created equal. But I think if you're thinking it from a scientific or a biological point of view, which, isn't a good idea when looking at the Bible, I know. But if you're looking at it from that, the woman would come first. Like, the woman would come first and be impregnated by God, by an angel, by whoever, and then men would come. Like,
How
it's
very woke of you.
thank you, Dale. But that's just a thought that I had on it. Like, it just didn't make sense because not generally, it's a fact. Women are the ones who give life on earth. We're the ones who give life to the physical vessels of souls, if you believe in souls. And it would make sense for God to supply the souls and for Eve to supply the physical bodies.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I know a couple of you in here have read Frankenstein with me too, but now that we've covered Paradise Lost, you guys can now kind of see some of the subtext in Frankenstein. Should Victor Frankenstein have created a mate for his creature? Right. Well, if he would have, right, would it be the same thing that Eve is with Adam here? Okay.
This explains why Frankenstein didn't once question, if his Eve would have been compliant or if his Eve would have even wanted to be created. Like, the way that this is written and the misogynistic undertones that lie within it definitely explain Frankenstein's just, I want a woman.
Right. Yeah, the creature wants a mate, just like Adam, right? But would she have free will, right? Or maybe she wouldn't want the creature, right? Maybe she would want somebody else. Right, so that's a can of worms.
Yeah, if I remember right, Frankenstein's miserable because he's alone, right?
Yeah, the creature is, yeah.
Yeah, is he non-binary?
Right.
Are you saying
I
the
thought
creature was non-binary? I thought he was male.
Oh yeah, he's male. That's that's just the Frankenstein's the creator and the creature's the monster. Right?
an interesting thought that I had when we were reading it in Dr. Yeager's class, Dale, is how, Frankenstein's father, doctor, I don't even remember his name, but how he was questioning if the Dr. Frankenstein was still into his cousin for a wife because they'd been raised together. And I thought maybe if, Dr. Frankenstein did give the creature a wife, maybe after him raising her and kind of educating her, if she would even be interested in him in that way.
Yeah, oftentimes she's not. I've seen retellings of that, and she's often very resentful of Frankenstein.
Yeah, the Bride of Frankenstein movie from the 30s, right? She rejects him, right? Which causes in the Bride of Frankenstein movie from the 30s, she rejects him, and then the creature like burns her to death, right? It's pretty dark for a 30s movie.
Yeah, she rejects him in the Penny Dreadful novels too.
Yeah, good conversation today. I think we're setting everything up pretty nicely. We'll get back. We didn't get to talk about Eden and stuff as much as I would like today, so we'll get back to that a little bit next class. Book 5 and 6 is what's on the table for next class. This is the really cool part of the text, right? This is the war in heaven that we're going to get. So we're going to actually get the counting of like when Satan fell, when Satan gave birth to sin, to sin and death. Basically, as we'll find out, sin was born out of his own head, and then he had sex with sin and created death. Right? So we'll find that out in book 5 and 6. I know you asked me to explain that the other day, Dale. But that's what we'll get all that in book 5 and 6.
Because it's weird how he's already came across sin and death if they're yet to be created.
And it's kind of weird that he doesn't remember them, right? So yeah, well, the next part's cool, right? You got angels throwing entire mountains at each other, right? Yeah, this is the next part of this is very heavy metal, right? So I will look forward to discussing it.
Can I ask you a question about the essay?
Okay.
Is it due Monday?
Yeah, next Monday. Yeah.
Okay, so by midnight that Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's when that's due. And that was on the drama unit, so Shakespeare or Marlowe.
All right, appreciate it.
All right, so from next time, you got more Paradise Lost in your papers, so that's coming up.